Hey class, it's Miss Jump again. How are you? I hope that your first day of the new NTI schedule treated you well. I want to encourage you throughout the week to keep track of what you think went well in not just my class, but all of your classes, and what you want to see improve with this new NTI schedule. And on Friday, you're going to be sent an email from, I believe, Mr. Magner or Mrs. Chernick that's going to ask you to fill out a weekly review. And I encourage you to put those things that you've been thinking about throughout the week into those weekly reviews, because we will continue to read those reviews and change the schedule to accommodate any additional need that we didn't know of or didn't quite understand. And this is a chance that you don't always get to have your voices heard, because we are adaptable as a school and as a student body, and we are in this together, and we're going to be working together on this. Speaking of changes, if you haven't noticed, my background looks a little different. I've always been interested in video editing and green screen production. It's one of those things that I kind of had on the list of possible things to do in college, and obviously I went toward teaching, which is awesome, but I'm still interested in that, and I figured this would be a really good time for me to sit back and learn this. I'm a very new learner. So if you see that there is a background that fits perfectly around me, I'm amazing. I figured it out. But if you do see a background and it is kind of jaggedy and weird, it's because I'm still learning. And I'm going to continue to learn. Just like NTI days, you will see me adapt as a learner and as a teacher. I figure this is much more entertaining than me sitting on my desk and you just staring at the same thing. And if I can figure out how to kind of make it a little bit better for you, I'm going to. If there's nothing in the background, that just means that I have not figured it out yet. But don't think that I've just given up. I'm continuing to work on it. I just was not able to fill it out or do it the way that I felt like was acceptable in the time constraints that we have. So with that being said, if you watched my video yesterday, you should know that we are not going to be learning anything new. Instead, we're going to be focusing our time on understanding the world around you and skills that are useful for the world. Unfortunately, that means we're not going to finish our unit on World War II, and we're not going to continue on the units after World War II. However, if you want to continue to learn about World War II, if you're interested in this topic, contact me. I have a large collection, a web mix created specifically for World War II. And it has websites, and it has documentaries on YouTube, documentaries from Netflix, and activities that you can do for possible extra credit if you want. And I am more than willing to share that with you. I've worked really hard on that. For everyone else, I'm going to quickly give you a rundown. First off, England, France, and America all was able to kind of take back everything and win the war. If you remember, France was taken over by Germany. It was able to kind of fight the Germans off, and the Germans were being kind of taken over or squished on both sides. They were fighting that two-front war that they wanted so hard to avoid. In 1945, Hitler, who was trapped between the French and the English on one side and the Soviet Union on the other side, committed suicide in a bunker with his wife, Eva Bonn. And Mussolini was actually dragged down the streets, literally dragged down the streets behind a car and hung from a light pole in Italy, and was eventually killed. And then General Tojo, the leader of the Japanese military who took control of Japan, was actually arrested by an international committee, tried and hung for his war crimes. So America wins the war with the help of the Allied powers, of course. I know that I've always talked about my love for World War II and the Cold War, but I know it's a really scary time for you, and I know that it's much more important for you to focus on remaining stress-free and healthy during this unprecedented time than for me to teach you things that, yes, you probably do not need to know to survive in the world. So instead, I'm going to be focusing on developing your skills that I think is important for becoming a citizen of the United States. With that being said, let's actually move in to what we're going to be discussing today. If you remember all the way before spring break, I posted a bell ringer for you to answer. And not to brag or anything, but I think it's my favorite spell ringer I have ever created in the entire year. And ask you, if I were to give you something, anything, would you know whether it was propaganda? And many of you said that you probably would, although it might take some time. And I wanted you to think about that before I began to talk about the role that the comic book industry had in creating propaganda during World War II. And we're going to review what propaganda is, what are some tools that make propaganda effective, and how we can look at the way that the comic book industry used propaganda in World War II to look at modern forms of propaganda. So what is propaganda? Propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. And when we talked about a lot of the propaganda used in the comic book industry was trying to get you to support America's involvement in the war, to support World War II and the Allied powers. And it was also trying to get you to look at Hitler and the Axis powers as the enemy of the United States, of the ideas that make the United States as amazing as it is. It's not just important for you to analyze propaganda and understand what they're wanting you to believe, but it's also important to look at the tools that the propaganda creators use. One of the most common propaganda tools used is the use of emotion. And this should be reviewed, but there are two different types of emotions. There are negative and positive emotions. Negative emotions are things like fear. Fear of Nazi conquest, of Nazis taking over America. What will happen to your home, your family, your lives, if you don't do anything to protect them? Positive emotions are things like pride of your country. If you have somebody to describe what it means to be an American, you'll hear a lot of descriptions. Things like freedom, liberty, equality. Those ideas are very positive, and you can be prideful of America's support of liberty and justice. So propaganda posters obviously are going to be using emotions to get you to kind of keep your eye on what they want you to do, but they also do a couple of things to keep you supportive of whatever they want you to support. One way they do that is to make you forget about the other side, to forget about the consequences that might come from the decision that they want you to make. So for example, Captain American comic books were trying to get people to sign up or support the war in whatever way that they can. However, it does not mention that by supporting the war, either you or your loved ones might have to die for America to win the war. Just watch any Marvel movie. Every single Marvel movie takes place in a major city, and that city gets destroyed. And the heroes come and save the day, and the city gets destroyed, but hey, we were able to defeat the enemies and we're able to protect the people of the United States. What they don't talk about is the damage, right? Like, I want somebody to sit down, like an economist, to sit down and to calculate the complete damage that was done by the Avengers. Seriously, entire buildings in New York were completely destroyed by Hawk himself. That doesn't include all of the other buildings that were destroyed. The people that were in those buildings dying. They never talk about those. They specifically just talk about the hero saving the day. That's the same thing that's happening in propaganda. They don't talk about the bad things that come with that decision. They just want you to realize that without the support of this specific interest, without you supporting World War II, Nazis are going to come and take us over. Now, another thing that propaganda typically does is it puts things into very simplistic terms. There is always a bad guy and there is always a good guy. And you never hear about the background of the bad guys, but the good guys are there to beat the bad guys, right? So I keep thinking back about the comic book that we looked at with Captain America punching Hitler in the face. In the background, and if I can, I'll try to put an image up, but in the background, you see Nazi soldiers shooting at Captain America. You, knowing how to look at, knowing who the superhero is in the story, knows that they are the bad guys. Now, what they don't tell you is that the background may say something a little bit different. And I know that I told you I'm not going to teach you anything new, but I think this is really, really important to know. When Hitler was given the title of Chancellor by the President of Germany, the Nazi Party had about 36% of the German vote. So 36% of people who lived in Germany actually voted for the Nazi Party. Once the president dies and Hitler names himself the Führer, he takes all of the opposition and removes them from having any kind of power in Germany. And the reason this is important is because Hitler then forces all of the civil servants, the police officers, the teachers, the military personnel to take an oath that will signify their total support for Hitler himself. In the United States, when you are elected into office, you must take an oath of office. Now, when you take an oath in the United States, you're promising to protect the Constitution. Even in the military, your oath talks about your complete and total support of the U.S. Constitution. That means that if I were to sign up for the Army and I was sent to fight a war abroad, and I had a commanding officer who told me to do something that I felt was constitutionally wrong, I have the right to say I am not going to do that. However, if I was in Nazi Germany and I took the oath that Hitler made everyone take, I would not have an option but to do whatever Hitler told me to do. If he told me to go home and kill my entire family, I had to go home and kill my entire family because I didn't have a choice in the matter. If I don't do so, I will be sent to the concentration camps and killed. In Germany, there were drafts. People were randomly drafted into the military, meaning that there are people in the military who may not have ever supported the Nazis, but in some ways pretend to support the Nazis because otherwise they would be killed. And when you see the cover of the Captain America comic book of him punching Hitler, you don't hear about the stories of the soldiers in the background. They could have just been told to shoot him down. If they were told by Hitler, they had no option but to do so. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in the German military were secret non-supporters and they hated the Nazi Party. There were a lot of supporters of the Nazi Party. But there is still that chance that the enemy that was defined by propaganda would really not be the enemy if we analyze it just a little bit closer. So I also want to talk about the fact that propaganda is not necessarily a bad thing. Once again, propaganda is defined as information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, that is used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. It does not mention whether propaganda is good or bad. And you should not feel bad if you like something that is considered to be propaganda. I love comic books, and I understand the way that comic books are used as a form of propaganda, and it doesn't make me a bad person to continue to like them regardless of that history. Similarly, what we're going to be talking about today is the military's use of propaganda. And I don't want you to watch this video and think that I am against the armed forces. I have many friends in the armed forces. I have friends in the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. I also have family in the Marines. I support the military. But I think it's also important that we look at the way that the military uses the practice of propaganda in the modern era. Because history is all about connection. And I want you to understand the world around you in a way that you may not have understood before. And just because the military uses propaganda does not make it bad either. Really, advertisements in general is just a form of propaganda. Every time you turn on the TV, companies are trying to influence you to do something. And sometimes they're like trying to get you to buy a Reese cup. And other times they want you to join the armed forces. So there's nothing inherently wrong with this. So with that being said, let's talk about modern forms of propaganda. We're going to talk about one form today, and we're going to talk about another form on Thursday. Today, specifically, we're going to talk about something that I know many of you enjoy playing, and those are video games. If you are a fan of classic video games, or you have family members that are, or you just watch TV and you understand classic video games and what they looked like, you should know that the military has always been pictured in video games. However, few of those titles that actually picture the military had any kind of official military involvement or had any type of input from the military. But recently, that has begun to change. So recently, the United States Army has decided to invest $50 million into video game development. The Army is just one branch of the military, and not only do all the branches of the military sponsor official games, but they also hire game developers to create simulations that are used for training their recruits. And the first kind of time that a video game was really created, not for training purposes, but endorsed by the military of the United States. And in 2002, America's Army was released, and it was a free-to-play first-person shooter game that gave players a taste of what it was like to be a member of the armed forces, and since then has garnered a number of awards over the years and has managed to attract several million players in both PCs and on console. And the point of the America's Army video game was to recruit people to join the armed forces. Now, the United States military continues to invest in the video game industry as a form of recruitment. And this is a form of propaganda. And in the modern era, we don't truly know how much money is being given to video game industries from all branches of the military to help financially support the development of the video games, but we know that it happens. And in fact, in 2017, the United States actually announced the creation of an esports team that will compete with other esports teams in competitions. For those who are unaware of esports, it is just like traditional sports teams, but instead of going and like physically fighting each other on the field, they are on a stage and they are competing with one another with a particular video game. And so you have teams just like the Bengals or just like the Reds that are versing or going against other teams around the country and around the world, and they can win money and goods and stuff. So the United States Army actually recruited some of the Army reserves and the people who are already in the Army to try out to become a part of the esports team of the United States Army. And what happens is they will go to these competitions and they will compete. And they will show people like, hey, it's kind of cool, like, look, we all love video games. If you like video games too, like, you'll fit right in. And additionally, what will happen, depending on the game that they're playing, is they will bring in weapons that are used in the game to actually have people, like, play with, or not really play with because they're dangerous weapons, but you can, like, hold a giant gun that is used in a modern warfare game. And is primarily used to get people sign up to be in the military. Now, just like what we talked about a few minutes ago, they're not going to be talking about the dangers of joining the Army. They will not talk about the amount of people who join the Army and never return. They're going to talk about how cool it is to use these really neat weapons that you've already been playing around with in video games in the real world. So today you're going to be looking at a few video games that were released in the modern era. Most of these, of course, are rated M, but the violence are very minimal in the video. And I want you to think about some of the tools that are used in propaganda. Is there certain emotions that are found in the video game, at least based on the trailer? Specifically, I want you to look at how does the video game make the United States military look strong? What types of emotions do you see? What types of technology do you see in the video that almost makes you want to play the game or possibly even join the military? And how does that compare to the propaganda that we've discussed in the comic book industry? So, if you have any questions about the videos, if you're having issues with the assignment itself, please do not hesitate to message me. Until then, I will see you on Thursday.